Today, I have a special guest to help me better understand what's going to happen in the next Trump administration, what's going on with the Russia-Ukraine war, and other major stories. Scott, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be with you.
So just some background. This is Scott Horton. He has a podcast where he goes over different war situations, big stories in the news. I recommend you check that out. He's also the author of a new book out called Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. Scott, that's right where I want to start. It's pretty obvious that President Biden and President Trump have very differing opinions on the Russia-Ukraine war. They have different goals, different desires. Why do you think they see this war so differently?
Well, Biden has got to be the worst president since Obama or Bush. He's really terrible, and his policy is absolutely insane. I mean, if you just go back to the start of the war in 2022, when Russia crossed the line and sent their tanks in and the fighting really began. I mean, there had been a longer term, low level conflict, but this was the real war at the end of February 22. All of mankind, right? Thought, ceasefire. Somebody stop it. Somebody do something to make sure that we don't have a hot conflict on Russia's border. They have 7,000 nukes, and our government and our allies are incredibly involved. And unlike our proxy war with Russia in Vietnam, where we had an entire China between Russia and Vietnam, and the Russians didn't give a damn what happened to Ho Chi Minh at the end of the day, here, we're 300 miles, 400 miles from Moscow. This is the most dangerous thing in the world. And then, wasn't it weird? Don't you remember thinking it was odd that we don't have a full diplomatic push to try to get a ceasefire and stop the war? And very quickly, they announced, remember, it was in the New York Times, David Sanger, one of their most important reporters. So the thinking in the White House is we want to lock Russia into a long-term conflict here, because we think in the end that'll weaken Russia. As they put it over and over, I'm sure you've heard them and your audience has heard them over and over again, the American War Party. They say, we got to send the Russians home in coffins. We got to send them home in body bags. We got to kill Russians. Like, and again, Vietnam, like we're talking body counts here rather than talking about what are we actually doing and why do we think that we're doing it? It's supposed to be just a given good to send Russians home in body bags. Well, maybe that's just going to make them madder. Maybe that's just going to make them devote even more of their gross domestic product to militarism. Maybe that's just going to drive them closer to China and give China more of a reason to try to limit American influence in Asia then. Or who knows what other consequences. They don't even seem to think about it at all. Never, much less, and I'm not like warning that this is inevitable or whatever. I'm not trying to be too alarmist about this, but they have, I think it's undeniable, they have increased the risk of thermonuclear war between NATO and the Russian Federation by some degree, which is absolutely intolerable. It's treason against all mankind. The enemy is the H-bombs, right? And anything that we're doing that makes them more likely to be used unnecessary, anything we're doing unnecessarily that's causing them more likely to be used is the highest crime imaginable. And people might have forgotten how powerful these machines are, but one or two of them could kill all of Dallas for you, okay? That's how big they are. That's how powerful these bombs are. A couple of megatons will do you. And even high kilotons completely erase your hometown off the face of the earth in a moment. In a real nuclear war, we would lose a World War II worth of people in the first 30 minutes. That's how bad it would be, okay? 60 million dead in the blink of an eye. Our whole civilization gone. And if we're going to have a showdown like that, it better be over something important. Go back to the last Cold War, where Ike Eisenhower said, oh, what the Soviets are doing cracking down on the insurrectionists in Hungary is terrible. Sorry, Hungarians. And LBJ said, oh, what the Soviet Union is cracking down on the Prague Spring there in Czechoslovakia. It's an unforgivable commie sin. Good luck to you, boys. And when it wasn't the Soviets, but their sock puppets in Poland cracked down on solidarity in the early 1980s, Ronald Reagan said, man, we wish you guys the best of luck. Why? Our government had drawn the line halfway across Germany. We said, listen, if you try to take over West Germany or France or any of the other Western democracies, we'll meet you there with atom bombs. That was the line. Now America has moved that line 1,200 miles east, given war guarantees to all of these countries at Russia's expense, and knowing all along that they're encroaching in Russia's former sphere of influence, including lands that had belonged to Russia for 300 years, long before the Commie Empire had ever existed, and making them afraid that we're threatening their security. And the whole time, and I demonstrate this in the book, it's part of why it's so thick. I just have quote after quote after quote from the Bush senior years all the way through of all of the greatest experts knowingly talking about why we should not do this. And then they do it anyway. Now, a lot of the times it's people who said we should not do this and then change their mind and do it anyway. Not just against good advice, but people like Strobe Talbot knew better. He worked for Bill Clinton. He knew better before he changed his mind and said, we have to do this. But all along they recognized if we're moving the line, then we have not erased the dividing lines in Europe. We simply moved it east. We brought more of Russia's former, the Soviet vassal states of the Warsaw Pact and the so-called Soviet republics into our sphere, but necessarily at Russia's expense because they can never join. They're too powerful to join. If they were allowed in, we would have to cede real decision-making authority over to them in a way that we really don't let the Germans or the British get in our way when we want something, we would have to truly compromise with them and share power with them. But we beat them. We're not going to share power with them. That's the attitude. And all along they said, the people who knew better said, well, listen, if we expand NATO like this, it could generate a really bad reaction from Russia. But then if it does, hey, at least we have NATO. So they know that they're prophesying, and then they're fulfilling their own prophecy, and they know it while they do it, and then they just do it all anyway. It's the slowest motion train wreck in the world. It's unbelievable. And they just keep doing it and doing it. And they advise, some of the people who are the greatest advocates of expansion the whole time said, well, but of course we have to make a special case for Ukraine. This is an extremely crucial country to Russia. They have this heavily ethnic Russian population, and they have this crucial port at Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. That's everything to them. Doesn't really matter to us. America doesn't need the Black Sea to have access to the Med, right? Like, what do we care who rules Sevastopol? But, some in our government are willing to try to take it from them, no matter what cost. And so Trump, you asked now, what makes Trump different? Because what I just described is the Bush, Clinton, Biden, McCain, Kagan consensus, right? The neocons and all of the principles this whole time. That's their consensus this whole time. What's Donald Trump about? Well, he's a disruption in that. He's not good on everything. He's not the Ron Paul I wish he was. But on this issue, he just always thought it didn't make any sense to make an enemy out of Russia when, if you're thinking for the long term of our society and our species, and you imagine our country's going to last at least another few hundred years into some unimaginable future, then, well, of course, we have to maintain a copacetic relationship with Russia. It doesn't mean we have to give in to them on every single thing in the world, but it means that we don't put the interests of Prague or Warsaw ahead of our interest in maintaining a decent relationship with Moscow. And instead, that's what they let themselves do. They often argue, and there's some truth to this, probably a lot of truth to this, although they were heavily lobbied too. But the Eastern European countries, of course, want to be part of NATO because they're still afraid of Russia from the battle days of the Soviet Union and the future days that they could imagine when strong men come to power and try to take them back over again. So, of course, they want to hide behind America's skirts. But the question is whether America thinks it's worth it to us or not. And again, there were all these other alternatives, that were proposed by even the expanders all along to come up with alternatives for expansion, or at least special case exemptions for countries like Ukraine, where it would be like in the last Cold War with the Soviet Union, we had a deal with Austria, where they were neutral. They were neither East nor West, and they didn't have Soviet or American troops occupying them or dominating their foreign policy. And then both sides left well enough alone there. And so that was the idea, that what we could do with Ukraine, and even expanders like Brzezinski and Kissinger and some of the most prominent hawks on the issue of expanding the alliance and American dominance in Europe, still recognized that, look, I mean, we don't want to just stick our thumb in the Russians' eye for no reason at all if we're going to pick a fight. So now Trump thought, well, this is bad business. We should get along with Russia. After all, it was a brilliant stroke of genius, wasn't it, when Nixon went to China and shook hands with Mao Zedong and made friends with China 17 years before the end of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. He ended the Cold War with China, made them our friends. And as they said, only Nixon can go to China, because if anyone else did it, Nixon would have called him a commie and not gotten away with it, right? So, but Nixon can do it. And same thing with Trump. Trump ought to be able to go to Moscow, to Pyongyang, to Beijing, and just make friends, to Tehran, and just say, enough of this. I ain't afraid of no Ayatollah. Put her there, Ayatollah. Let's get along now so that we don't have a fist fight. And find a way to get along. Again, Brzezinski, in the case of Iran, Brzezinski himself, Carter's extremely hawkish national security advisor and the Democratic Party's Kissinger for 40 years. He said in the 90s, and he was, by the way, he was the national security advisor during the Iranian Revolution. That was his humiliation. But just, 15 years later, he goes, hey, let's build a peace pipeline across Iran. We'll mix our interests with their interests and try to figure out a way to go along. And of course, the Israel lobby vetoed that. But it just goes to show that the Ayatollah doesn't have black magic powers. He can't hurt you. There's no reason in the world that the American superpower can't deal with the likes of him. And then, honestly, the same thing goes with Putin and with Xi. They are powerful enough nations that they can maintain their independence from us. But that doesn't mean that we have to be afraid of them. And that doesn't mean that we have to caricature their leaders as so evil and wily and malevolent that we can never negotiate with them, which is what they do. I mean, as you've noticed, they talk about Putin. They make him essentially indistinguishable from Adolf Hitler, which, if you know anything about the history of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, you know is just not an apt comparison. They do this all the time, comparing people to Hitler, but it's just completely crazy. Like, this guy is the most fanatical lunatic to ever seize power anywhere. I mean, other than Pol Pot maybe or something. But to compare Putin, the bureaucrat, who's been sitting in that chair for 25 years, essentially being an extremely cautious and judicious applier of power and a suck up to W. Bush and Obama. Well, less so to Obama, but he really did try to suck up to W. Bush and get along with the United States as much as he could, because he saw that as in his interest. And that was all Trump saw too. And then I just had a conversation with Dinesh D'Souza a second ago. And he says, how does it make sense for America to push Russia into China's arms? Yeah, good question, right? Nixon was a genius for splitting China away, but Biden's a genius for pushing them back together again? That doesn't sound right. And so the idea would be you break off the weaker power from the stronger one. Then the Soviet Union was the stronger one, so we break off their junior partner, China. Here, Russia's now in the weaker economic position, so they're the junior partner to China, so we should be trying to break them off. And after all, they're Europeans. They're Christians. They're part, not exactly the West, but like Eastern European Christian civilization. And so why in the world? And they're not communists anymore. If anyone in your audience, you know, for any reason, like they went to college or something and they want to underestimate the evil of Soviet totalitarianism, you're all wet. It was as bad as it could possibly be. You can't meet a right winger who could embellish the tyranny of Soviet communism beyond what was actually true. Your most anti-communist friend doesn't know how bad it really was over there. So, you know, there's no end to the relief that the USSR is gone, but it is gone. And it was overthrown by the men that America then turned around and backstabbed for trying to be our friends.
Do you see part of Trump's plan to end the Russia-Ukraine war? Do you see him going to Russia like he went to North Korea? Or do you think he'll go to a neutral place where Putin and Zelensky and he can sit down together? Are you feeling the stress about giving your family a memorable holiday? You're not alone. Prices remain higher than ever, and a lot of us are maxing out our credit cards. Now is the perfect time to take control of your finances and pay off that debt. If you're a homeowner, American Financing can help you unlock the equity in your home and start saving. Their customers save $800 a month on average. Just imagine what that can mean for your family. Plus, if you act now, you may even be able to delay 2 mortgage payments, giving you extra cash for the holiday season. Wouldn't it be nice to start off the new year without that debt and those monthly payments? It costs nothing to find out how much you could save. The holidays are here before we know it, and you should reach out to American Financing to learn more about that today. You can call them at 888-686-8030. That's 888-686-8030. Or go to americanfinancing.net/Gardner. If you have home equity, check them out today.
I don't know how it's going to shake out. I'll tell you one good piece of news that makes me take his rhetoric especially serious on this is that Marco Rubio is already frozen out. This is not going to be the State Department's job. Trump has already announced his special envoy is his trusted former, I guess he was Vice President Pence's national security advisor, General Keith Kellogg, who's not the best guy, but he's a competent enough guy. And he has been named to be the special envoy to end the war. So, exactly how they accommodate the thing, I don't really know. The problem is, well, first of all, I think we can dispense with all the hype about how Russia just wants to conquer all of Europe. And as soon as he's done taking all of Ukraine, then he's marching on Poland. That's not what this is. And quite frankly, I don't see any evidence that he wants to even take all of Ukraine.
Do you think Europe believes that he wants to take over Europe?
I don't know. Like these governments, they make a lot of claims. A lot of times they believe their own hype because they need to. It's hard to say. But, Victoria Nuland, who's one of the villains of this story, is Robert Kagan's wife, who has done a lot to influence American policy in the Clinton, W. Bush, and Obama years, and Biden years. She was very influential and to the negative. And she recently admitted in her exit interview after leaving the State Department that, come on, the war in Ukraine shows that Russia's no offensive threat to Europe. Their military's a paper tiger. They can certainly dominate Eastern Ukraine, but Eastern Europe? Please. They clearly can't. And so by the iron law of confirmation bias, right, if even Victoria Nuland admits that I'm right about that, then I definitely am, right? And here, they don't even really seem to be trying to take all the land all the way to the river, the Dnieper River, which sort of bisects Ukraine. It's got a big bend in it, but they seem truly to be interested in seizing the Donbass, which is the oblasts or provinces of Luhansk and Donetsk. And then there are 2 more in the southeast there that create the so-called land bridge to Crimea, and that is Zaporozhye and Kherson. They don't really seem to want to even take, I can never pronounce it, Dnipropetrovsk or whatever, that the giant land between the river and the Donbass there. I don't know if maybe eventually they will, or if they would demand that in negotiations. But right now, they don't control Kharkiv, and they don't control Odessa. And so which is the extremely important last port city left that Ukraine has on the Black Sea. And they could lose those cities if the war keeps going as it is. And Putin may play his toughest tough guy card and demand them. I don't think Trump will give in to that. If he did demand them in negotiations. I don't think Trump's just going to hand them over. And quite frankly, I don't think Putin even really wants them. I think they're more than he wants to try to handle. He's taken back, quote unquote, because we're talking about not private property and legitimate ownership here. We're talking about nation states. But so he has so-called taken back former Russian territories, Novorossiya, the Donbass and Novorossiya, the land in those 4 eastern provinces and the Crimean Peninsula. I don't think he really wants much more than that. And so that being the case, that means, well, on one hand, he's in a position of strength to demand what he can, and that puts America and our allies in Ukraine in a position of weakness to make any demands on our side from him. On the other hand, doesn't look like he's probably going to ask for much more than he's already won through force anyway. And so hopefully, right, this is the game. The game is, what your real question is can they work out a deal that's not too humiliating for the losing side, that the thing breaks down and the war just continues and they just keep losing worse, right? That's what it has to be. It has to be enough where both sides can save face enough that they can claim that, well, it could have been worse. And by the way, I think this is a terrible self-inflicted wound, never mind how unjustified it was. And I make the case against the invasion in the book. The book is called Provoked, not Justified. I think it was wrong for them to do it. But also, even just from the point of view of Russian national interests, it was a mistake. They could have found more subtle ways of exerting their influence here to solve this problem. And instead, what they've really done is they've removed the Russian population and the pro-Russian population from Ukraine. They used to win elections. Their guys used to win elections over there. There was something like a balance. You wouldn't really call them Republicans and Democrats, but call them ethnic Ukrainians and ethnic Russians. And more Eastern leaning people. I mean, the heaviest population was in the east of the country, and heavily ethnic Russian and linguistically Russian. And Russia's essentially taken all those people and made them part of Russia now, leaving Ukraine under the control of far-right ethnic nationalists who hate their guts and always will. And they've created a new, perpetual problem for themselves there. And it's perfectly fair to blame Obama and McCain first and Joe Biden first, but the Russians, they made their own mistakes in this thing, and that's going to be one of the major consequences for them.
Yeah. Do you find it odd that President Biden has pardoned Hunter for crimes in Ukraine and that Donald Trump was impeached for asking about the Biden crimes in Ukraine?
No, I'm not surprised. I think he had to do that to try to prevent any investigation from being opened or reopened. I think they're paranoid about what a great job the new Trump Justice Department is going to do, re-examining all their past sins. I mean, a man can dream, but again, this is not Ron Paul. This is Rudy Giuliani here. So I hope he has a vendetta enough that he tells the new FBI director to investigate with the wide net any former Justice, FBI or CIA or Democratic Party or whoever officials that he feels like. Go for it. I don't care. Persecute the hell out of all of them. They deserve it so bad, but I don't think that's really even going to happen anyway. And as far as what Hunter did in Ukraine, I have a section on this in the book. I don't know that there's necessarily any real crime that he was involved in. There's like some indications that the investigation was meandering toward him and some of, his actions that he was taking on the board to try to provide public relations for this company that had hired him. But I'm not so sure that he necessarily crossed the line into illegality there. But forget that, man. That's all a red herring. That's not the story. The story is zoom out. The story is, why was he hired? He was hired so that the company would be protected from the new regime, which was the sock puppet of Vice President Biden, whose people had just done the coup, had just, launched a successful overthrow of the government there. So as the great journalist Matt Taibbi explained, and the New York Times also has a thing about this as well, Burisma was in close with Yanukovych, the guy who'd just been overthrown. So the reason they brought Hunter Biden on board, as well as Cofer Black, the former CIA head of counterterrorism, and I can't remember the guy's name, a former Polish president they brought on. That was the highest level of protection that they were buying, was just having Hunter there. You wouldn't dare prosecute my company now when the vice president of the United States' son is sitting on our board of directors, would you? He's trying to just build himself a little protection from the incoming government. So that is, to my mind, like impeachable high crimes. I don't know whether it's a felony under which statute, but I'm not a lawyer. But you see what's going on there is absolutely unforgivable that the vice president of the United States would allow his son to do that Barack Obama would not order an end to that immediately. We know that Obama's State Department opened an investigation into this because they knew how bad it looked and they wondered whether it was criminal, and they looked into whether it was criminal themselves. I don't know if we ever found out what their investigation determined there. But so anyway, as far as Trump saying, there's no point in ever looking into anything my son did because I've given him blanket protection for all of that. It makes sense that he would hope that that would just bury the entire question. But, the thing of it is one thing I like about Donald Trump is he carries a vendetta. And remember, they impeached him over this stuff.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's sometimes hard because the stories come out so far apart from each other. Sometimes people don't put it together that the FBI had seized the Hunter Biden laptop. They knew of it and they knew it was 100% legit in November of 19. And they had it in their possession by December of 19. And then Trump is impeached in January and February of 20. This is all coming on while the FBI has the laptop. And the laptop proves Hunter Biden's relationship with Burisma, including all their emails back and forth. We're trying as hard as we can to get the public relations going for you, trying as hard as we can to intervene with, here's your indication of obstruction of justice, right? We're trying as hard as we can to intervene with people who are looking at you guys criminally. And so if that had come out during the impeachment, because remember, Vindman, who testified against Trump, he goes, well, look, if Trump is saying, geez, I wish you'd please look at that, right? He's not demanding a criminal investigation and any real quid pro quo or anything like that. But he's saying, geez, it sure would be nice if you looked at that. Vindman says that is illegal, criminal interference in an election because he is demanding that Ukraine investigate Biden for something that Trump knows Biden is innocent of. So he's demanding a fake investigation. He's demanding an illegal persecution of his opponent by a foreign government. Except that wasn't true. And if the laptop had come, think about 10,000 leaks against Trump by the FBI. But nobody leaked that actually we have the laptop, and there's some pretty damning emails in there that show that Trump is actually right about, maybe he's not right that there's felonies in here, but he's certainly right that there's scandal in here. Turns out President's son's a crackhead and left his laptop at the repair shop. And we got all this dirt now. And then what they do? They held on to it for another year, and then what they do come time for the election? They secretly briefed the media and all of the tech companies that there's an incoming Russian disinformation story about Burisma and Hunter Biden. So when it comes out and we tell you the word, you crush that story and you don't cover it. We know Giuliani has an October surprise coming. And then this, and we know later, it was admitted later that it was Jake Sullivan and Antony Blinken. They intervened. It was Antony Blinken who intervened with, forgive me, it's on the tip of my tongue. Mike Morrell, the former head of the CIA, former acting director of the CIA, to put that letter out saying that the thing was fake. And he was working, he's Biden's right-hand man and was, of course, working on the campaign and was working to protect him. And then the guys that signed the letter, they admitted, well, we just wanted Biden to win. That's all. They knew they were lying. And they crushed that story. And this is all other things being equal. Just leave everything else aside. The story of the censorship of the Republicans' October surprise of 2020 is some world historical stuff. Like just the censoring of that story on Facebook and Twitter and the inability of people to talk about that in any media. Leslie Stahl's just blind idiot repetition to Trump that it can't be verified. Well, why can't it be verified? Because it can't. Why not? Their emails. Can't you just ask the people on the other end of the email whether this is a legit email or not? You could ask them to show you. Nope, can't be verified. Can't be verified. Can't be verified. Come on. And we put up with that.
Yeah. I want to switch gears. You brought up a couple of names that I want to get your thoughts on. Ron Paul announced over on Twitter that it's time for the United States to end all foreign aid. America has way too many financial problems to be bailing everybody out. Elon Musk, the future head of Doge, then retweets that. It has like 40 or 50 million views. People seem very optimistic about that. At the same time, we have people in North Carolina that are still living in tents in winter. What are your thoughts on Ron Paul calling for an end to foreign aid? and Donald Trump hinting that he may actually be open to something like that.
Well, I agree with Ron Paul about everything. Ron Paul is the greatest living American, maybe the greatest American who ever lived, the greatest teacher and progenitor and spreader of the ideas of individual liberty, sound capitalist economics, and constitutional government that's ever lived. He's Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, but without the sins. He's a wonderful guy, and everyone should read everything he ever wrote, all of his books and all of his great articles and everything. He's got the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, which is doing a fund drive right now. In fact, by the way, I'm just friends, not interested there. And so, yes, people absolutely ought to listen to him. This is the guy who told you so about everything. And look, when he says $36 trillion national debt is too high, believe it. Janet Yellen said she expects it to be $50 trillion by the end of this decade. And what does that mean? It means that right now, just paying the interest on the national debt is the highest part of the budget after the transfer payments, more than the military. And it's just absolutely unsustainable. I mean, think about every dime that you've paid in income taxes your entire life. And it wasn't even wasted killing some guy. And it wasn't even wasted buying an overpriced lug nut on a wheel on a plane that never flew. It just went to pay the interest on the debt to some sovereign government bondholder that bought it with money that they printed out of nothing too. Oh my God. It's enough to just drive one to absolute misery to think of the wealth that the real wealth that they confiscate from the American people to just absolutely piss away like this. And it's the militarism. That's the heart of all of it. And the reality is that the middle part of North America cannot afford to be the world empire. We just can't. There's a time after World War II where, we're like 2/3 of global GDP. Who's going to stop us? The Reds can keep us out, but otherwise the whole world is ours. But it's just not that way anymore. We can't afford it, and the rest of the world can afford to keep us away. Look at, for example, China building up their navy, not to rule the world's 7 seas, but to keep us out of theirs, all right. And that's just how, those are the breaks. Would we prefer that they were all still starving to death by the tens of millions under Maoist communism? Or we're happy that they abandoned that absolutely satanic, horrific policy. But now we have to accept the fact that now that they have markets, that means that their national government can also afford Navy ships, So this is part of the cost of the progress of humanity is we have now a multipolar type of a planet that America just cannot dominate. So why try? And after all, they have to make up these cartoons about Hitler and Stalin because there is no Hitler and Stalin. There's not even a Pol Pot. We don't really have enemies on that order to deal with. And so they have to come up with all these exaggerations when in fact, there's no problem in Europe that couldn't just be negotiated between Germany and Russia. There's no, right. And we're not talking about the Hitler-Stalin pact. We're talking about the Merkel-Putin pact. Who cares, right? They want to have a peace pipeline. Let me remind you, the last 2 times that Germany and Russia fought, it was the worst thing that ever happened, ever. Hey, maybe we want to encourage them to have a peace pipeline. Maybe who cares if Texans, and I'm from Texas, but what if Texas natural gas companies have to make a little bit less money selling liquefied natural gas to Germany because Germany has a peace pipeline with Russia? Well, good. See if I care. Those are the breaks of the markets, pal. Find somebody else to sell your natural gas to. The world is lousy with customers, man. You can find some. Why does it have to be Germany? And why does it have to be at the expense of an economic relationship between those two powers that could prevent a horrific catastrophe from breaking out? Just makes no sense. Oh, this reminds me, I should mention this. I keep forgetting to bring this up. I highly recommend to you and your audience, I talk about this in the book. There's a thing called at the Rand Corporation, which is a think tank that's sponsored by the Pentagon. But it's out in California, so they can kind of have an independent view a bit, and clearly they follow this advice. The study is called Extending Russia, and they published it in 2019. And by extending, they mean overextending Russia. They mean finding ways to provoke Russia into doing stupid things, giving them problems in Kazakhstan, giving them problems in Syria, giving them problems in Ukraine, giving them problems in Belarus, finding a way, as the leader of Stratfor, the so-called private CIA, George Friedman says, we hit them. We find a way to hit them, to keep them off balance, to keep them from entrenching, to keep them from succeeding, to keep their markets unstable, to keep their military unstable, to keep their intelligence services unstable, to keep them afraid, to keep them worried, to keep them wondering. We hit them here, we hit them here, we hit them here. We fly our bomber flights 12 and a half miles off their coast, constantly rehearsing a nuclear first strike. We threaten them. We have army exercises in Estonia, just hundreds of yards from the Russian border. We as they say in there, and by the way, you'll enjoy reading. It's really a fun read in a crazy, horrible, ironic way, because every section that says, well, here's what we could do, it has a warning. It says, man, if you listen to us, it could be really bad. And then you go down the list and they do it all anyway. As I say in the book, it's like Biden got a copy of the list of recommendations without any of the disclaimers included. And so coup in Belarus. In fact, this was Trump in 2020. Let's try another coup in Belarus. Increase support for the rebels in Syria. That'll sure weaken Russia. That's in there. Let's see if we can support intervention in Kazakhstan. Now, we can't really take Kazakhstan away from Russia. They're Russia's Mexico. There's a huge, gigantic southern border state for them, and they're not going to let it go. But we can mess around in there enough to frustrate them and force them to spend money and divide their attention and all this. This is how America operates. Hit them, hit them, hit them, hit them, hit them. Intervene, 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 intervene. This is how we do with Iran, with Russia, and with everybody who's our supposed adversary. And Ron Paul is right there. We just don't have to do that. It just doesn't have to be that way at all. We have to be the dominant power all over Eurasia forever. It's just crazy. And, by the way, when they talk about foreign aid, and I don't mean Ron Paul, he always is very careful the way he describes these things. But a lot of times they talk about foreign aid, and they're just talking about like goofy humanitarian aid and appropriations to NGOs, which is a lot to them, but it's a pittance. And the real foreign aid is military foreign aid directly through the Pentagon. They don't even stop at the State Department. The Pentagon themselves have massive slush funds to hand out money to militaries all around the world, and to control militaries regardless of what political governments want all across the planet Earth. So you want to stop foreign aid, you have to listen to all of Ron Paul, and you have to abolish the American empire. We don't need it. It is the number one cause of our economic and our societal disruptions in this country. It's the worst thing about our government, and it's really the most important causal factor in determining the relationship of the American people to our government. What is the national government to us? What they used to call the general government, the federal government in Washington, D.C. And there was a time where they didn't even know who the American people were because we were none of their business, right? It's the state governments were much more like states, and they were sovereign in charge of criminal and civil justice and all of the rest of the things. And we have turned our general government into truly a national government, which shouldn't even be called that. It truly is a single nation state with the 50 states relegated to these large counties under centralized federal control. And as you've noticed, our whole society, everybody's at each other's throats because it's so much power that nobody can stand the thought of it being in the hands of the other guy. And so if the other guys get it, they're going to erase our entire way of life and vice versa. And nobody can stand it. Well, I mean, the reversal of the Roe decision was a great start. And just all of these decisions need to be decentralized back out to the states. The national government's budget should be no more than a couple of $100 billion a year. And I mean, all other things being equal, not in my libertarian paradise, but I mean, in this real world, we don't need them. We don't. They are the greatest threat to the life and liberty of the American people. Admiral Mike Mullen, who was the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff during Barack Obama, someone quoted this on Twitter to me this morning on X, that Mullen had said, I had forgotten this, Mullen had said the greatest threat to the United States is our national debt. It ain't Russia, it ain't China. And Donald Trump talks like this too. People think of Donald Trump as he's just this China hawk, but Donald Trump is saying, hey, we can get along with China. We like China. We don't want them to do all the bad things we don't want them to do, but we can have a deal with them. Boy, that Chairman Xi, boy, did he love that chocolate cake I gave him that one time and blah, 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 whatever. So, which is great. Again, only Nixon can go to China. So now that all the Russiagate smears are gone, let Donald Trump, the great American patriot, remember he wrapped himself around the flag. He didn't wrap the flag around himself. He wrapped himself around the flag in that picture on the stage that time. The real estate tycoon with the giant buildings, with his right-wing National Security Council, let him make peace. Let him go around and make peace. After all, remember the pictures of him and Kim in North Korea? Like, what, are you supposed to be upset about that? You look at that picture and think, I don't mean you, but like anyone, this is what TV expected of us, demanded of us, that when we look at those pictures, that we see Donald Trump selling America out to North Korea. Are you kidding? And remember what they did. The Democrats had his lawyer testify against him in Congress at the moment that he was sitting there trying to negotiate the deal. Michael Cohen, deliberate sabotage. And then, I mean, man, I want to get on this email list. I don't know how they do this. It's so cool. It's like black magic. They get every Democrat in America and every talking head in the media to all say the same thing at the same time in this chorus. It's beautiful in its horrificness, in its own way. And they all said the same thing. They said, Kim Jong-un is just going to walk all over Donald Trump. He is so wily and clever, and Donald Trump is so dumb that he's just going to wring every last concession out of Trump, and Trump is going to, in the end, he's going to betray America, and he's going to give away the whole store to North Korea. Like, what are we even talking about? What store? What do we have to give North Korea? A security guarantee? We promise not to attack you if you'll sign a treaty to end the last war from the 1950s that we don't even have a real armistice yet? If you'll begin to open negotiations toward reunification, or at least an open and friendly relationship with the South, and we could begin possible negotiations towards denuclearization, if we could possibly give firm enough security guarantees, maybe at least we could reduce their nuclear arsenal down. People think they have closer to 100 nuclear bombs now, 60, 80 nuclear bombs. Maybe we could get them back down to a couple dozen. Maybe it's smart to negotiate with North Korea. Why would we take it for granted that the George W. Bush, the Barack Obama policy of never talking to them, never negotiating with them, is any good at all? What did I just say? I said the estimates are now they're getting close to 100 atom bombs. This is just since W. Bush destroyed, and I don't ever like giving Bill Clinton credit. Please forgive me. But Bill Clinton did have what was called the Agreed Framework deal with North Korea, and W. Bush just tore it up. And added new sanctions and threatened them with a nuclear first strike and a nuclear posture review, called them the axis of evil. And then, and only then, did they kick the inspectors out and withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty and start making nuclear weapons. I mean, George W. Bush might as well have enriched the uranium for him to make those bombs. It's his fault. And then our attitude is, and this was Bush and Obama and not Trump, but then Biden's attitude is, give up all of your atom bombs first, and then we'll talk. Yeah, well, we're going to have a nuclear war before that. So I would say, and listen, people go, oh, well, they're commies and whatever. But look, again, if Nixon can go to China, then Donald J. Trump, the Republican, capitalist, Manhattan tycoon, can go to Pyongyang. I don't want to hear no whining. And the American right needs to be behind him when he seeks peace. And, we're going to have 4 years of absolute horror show in the Middle East at his hands. We can at least support him when he's trying to do the right thing in Russia and North Korea.
Scott, in our final minutes together, you've talked about Provoked a little bit, but tell my audience what Provoked is about, and then I'm going to put a direct link to it down below.
Yeah. So the book essentially takes you through from H.W. Bush through Bill Clinton, W. Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden, and explains and I know this is disputed, but I'm right about this, the promises not to expand NATO eastward and how they were broken, the Balkan Wars, economic shock therapy, the color-coded revolutions, missile defense, more NATO expansion, the Maidan Revolution of 2014 under Barack Obama, and the outbreak of war in eastern Ukraine, and all what led up to the war beginning in February of 22, and then all coverage of that war too. The book ends off in the beginning of, actually after the election, just after the election last month. So it's very up to date. In fact, the day I put it out, Biden announced that he was going to allow the Ukrainians to hit the Russians with those long-range missiles, and then Al Qaeda takes over Syria, you know. Oh, and then the color coded revolution has another chapter going on in Georgia. So I just can't keep up. But the book is almost complete, almost up to date for you, except for those 3 issues. It's right up to date for you. And the point is, and look, I like to cite this. The Declaration of Independence begins with a decent respect for the opinions of mankind. Here's why we're doing this. So I like to explain, because I know that your audience doesn't know who I am, and they don't know like why I would do what I think is the right thing or the wrong thing or what. I know there's so much propaganda. It is like the Red Scare almost, the level of propaganda about Russian talking points and Russian propaganda. Like, quite frankly, nobody in America cares about Russia. Like, I don't even think that the Russian diaspora has like a big pro-Putin movement. Nobody cares about that. You know, back in the days of the old Soviet Union, there were people who really were communists and loved the Soviet Union, Americans, I mean. But there's just nothing comparable to that now. You know, I think people, they ought to be able to see through that. It'd be like saying, oh, there's a big pro-Saddam Hussein movement in America. Well, look, just because we don't want to invade Iraq doesn't mean that it's because we have some undying loyalty to Arab Baathism, right? Like, that can't possibly be it. You know, it's the same kind of thing here. The book is, it's not blame America first. It's blame the U.S. government first. The U.S. government has been run by the likes of the Bushes and the Clintons, McCain and Biden this whole time. It'd be like, I like to say this one. Tell me if you like this one. It'd be like if Joe Biden did win the election of 1988 and he's been the president the whole time. That's basically it. That's the leadership that we've had this whole time, guiding us through our Eastern European and Middle Eastern policies this whole time. When I put it like that, you shouldn't be so offended that I'm insulting our country that we share here together, right? This isn't a hatred of America. It is, quite frankly, a hatred of Bill Clinton, but more especially, and from a more grown-up point of view, it's just a solid critique of what our leaders have done to get us into this mess, as they have with so many other things. I mean, the same people caused the financial crisis in 2008 and the one that we're facing right now. So anybody want to say that's Russian propaganda? Or no, that was America's leaders, America's central bankers, America's private bankers, and the American national government that did that rigged the interest rates and printed the money, that created the bubble that popped and created the crisis. You can call those Russian talking points because Sergei Lavrov agrees with them, but of course, Sergei Lavrov cites true things that makes America look bad. That's his job, but doesn't make them not true. And I'm not so afraid of something I say sounding like something someone else said that I'm going to be intimidated away from telling the truth. And I don't even speak Russian. I don't even know what the Russian talking points are. I don't care. If they're smart, they'll read my book and plagiarize it. And it's the Horton talking points that make their case better than any Russian I ever heard of made their case. I'm just saying. And I don't mean their case justifying what they did. I mean their case against what America has done to create the security dilemma that they did. And I think it's a solid case, and I think anybody reading it will agree with it. And, you know, like in my previous book, which is about the war on terrorism, which this one hit a lot closer to home for a lot of guys, because a lot of guys fought in the war on terrorism. This is a proxy war. It's a little bit different. We got a lot of guys who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I wrote those books. I didn't like pander to them and say like, hey, this one's for the soldiers and whatever, anything like that. I just told it straight. And I've had nothing but positive responses from soldiers since 2017 when my first book came out. And really for my show going back for years, but just focusing on the books, that none of them read my book about why Al Qaeda attacked us and why the war against them was such a disaster afterwards. None of them read that and said, you commie traitor, America hater. None of them. They all said, thank you for telling the truth. Now I understand the war they sent me to that I never understood before. Because the book, again, it wasn't written pandering to them, but it was written it wasn't written to demonize them either. As the book is about what the eggheads, what the civilians in charge did with their decision-making powers, rather than like, you know, a criticism of the soldiers in the war, really. Although there's a bit of that in there where they deserve it for actual war crimes and stuff. But for the most part, they were very receptive. I've gotten nothing but positive response from people at all levels too, including special operations guys and whoever about it. And I guess what I'm trying to say is simply because I'm not a commie, right? Because I'm not a leftist. I'm not anti-American, and I don't have a bunch of sort of leftist shibboleths in there that might be such a turnoff. So, you know what I mean? I'm being myself, and I'm a student of Ron Paul. So I come from the libertarian right. And so I hope that all of my books will be accessible, I mean to say, especially to the right. I want, that's where the fight is now. The liberals are the war party, but who could believe in them? None of them are any good in a fight. If a fight really breaks out, it's the right wing that has to support the war, or they can't have one. And so that is where the fight is today. And as everybody knows, they've been lying to you about everything. I'm just here to tell you the truth. That's all.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to put a direct link to that down below. If people want to follow you online or catch your show, what's the best way to do that?
All right, I'm at scotthorton.org. I got more than 6,000 interviews going back to 2003 for you there. And you can sign up for the podcast feed. And they're all at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show as well. And you can sign up for the podcast feed on any old podcatcher, Spotify, or any of those things. And then the books are all at scotthorton.org and at the Libertarian Institute, where I'm the director. And I got a great team of guys there at the Libertarian Institute. They got a bunch of great podcasts and articles and all the great stuff we're publishing there. And we just published, mine is now our 15th book, and we got more coming in the new year. Okay. So that's all at libertarianinstitute.org. And then otherwise, find me and all my guys at antiwar.com every day, please.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.